What is happening, everybody? It is time for another NBA Live Before Lock. Myself and Eric breaking down the slate. And then right after this, I'm going to be watching the game over and playback and joined by Ben Raza. So we'll talk about whatever the hell it is that Ben's betting on. You know, it's going to be some weird shit, but also stuff that's probably going to be profitable also. So come join us on playback. We'll sweat out the basketball game. We'll root on our DFS lineups, maybe play some live bets as well. It's something Ben and I have been doing. We've done some of those shows together. But before we get there, Eric and I breaking down today's game 2 of Celtics and Pacers. Do us favors, you guys are watching, like, follow, subscribe. If you got any questions for us in our Discord channel, at me so we can answer those questions as we go here. But Eric, what's happening, man?
Not much. Just got done with the worst, most horrific beat that I've had of the year with the Colorado Rockies in that infinity inning baseball game. I had a half unit on the Rockies. I was just trying to have a nice, lovely afternoon, getting ready for this game, firing everything up. It's my wife's birthday tonight, have these dinner plans and friends coming over and all this other stuff. And of course, I end up transfixed on this game that goes for 2 hours longer than it should have. And the Rockies blow a 9-5 lead by bringing in Michael Koch, and he just absolutely cocksmiths all of us. It was absolutely the worst beat of the year.
Yeah, I don't even know what the final score ended up being.
10-9.
Let's see. Oh, 10-9 in the 11th inning. Yeah, because, I played the early MLB slate, but my lineups weren't great, so I kind of stopped paying attention to it for a while. After Feltner came out of the game, I was like, all right, I guess I'm kind of done for the slate. I got like 50% of my entry fees back. Time to work on NBA. So yeah, I wasn't aware that game ended up going on for the entirety of the day. And somehow Rockies A's in Oakland ended up being the highest scoring game of the day. All right. Interesting. So bad beat for you there, but it's okay. We're going to get it back on tonight's slate here, Eric. And the first thing I want to ask you is, from game 1 to game 2, is there any sort of changes you envision either of these teams making, or should we look at the rotations from game 1 and more or less assume that they're going to be about the same, taking out of the equation, obviously, if there was an overtime? We're not going to assume overtime again.
Yeah, we're not going to assume overtime. I'm also not going to assume that necessarily the Pacers keep it that close. We saw Tyrese Halliburton play pretty darn well. We saw Miles Turner do exactly what I thought Miles Turner would do. 6 for 8 against Al Horford defense specifically. Absolutely eviscerated Luke Kornet. Was the best offensive player in that first half, and then they just kind of stopped going to him. I know that Boston will make adjustments. 40-plus minutes for everybody. Again, it has overtime baked in for it, so it looks a little bit wonkier, but I think for me, the big question is, like, do the Celtics dust off a little bit more Sam Hauser, try to spread the floor? You know, Drew Holiday played about as well offensively as what you could ask. He obviously had the spot where it made sense. He was probably not going to get as much attention as Derek White, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, obviously. But does Sam Hauser play more than 9 minutes? I think there's a chance. He was the only guy, him and Pritchard, -8 and -15 respectively. Pretty brutal in those minutes. Maybe we see Pritchard reduce down a little bit and we just ramp up the minutes for Drew and Derek White in competitive spots. But for me, I do think that I'm going to be building my lineups as that Boston is just going to beat that ass, because I do think that they do tonight.
So we've got a super chat here. This is from the comment god who won a free OddsShopper subscription on my NBA strategy show video I've been doing this morning. So one thing I've been doing that I found to be pretty fun is I put some sort of question prompt at the start of the video. The one we did today is, which starter in the game will score the least amount of fantasy points? Everybody leaves their answer below, and then I go through all the correct answers. I randomly select one of those people to win a free OddsShopper subscription. So Comment God ended up winning yesterday and got him hooked up with a free OddsShopper sub. He left us a super chat, and he asks us, do we think that Tillman plays? So there's 2 parts to this. First off, he is active for today. So Xavier Tillman missed the opening game of the series due to personal reasons. Here's the other part of this, though. Just because he's active doesn't mean he's going to be in the rotation. I think he probably plays, but not a significant amount of minutes. I think he gets like one short, like 2-3 minute rotation.
I have him in for 3 minutes, so you have that correct.
Here's where this does have an impact, though. So earlier in the day, I wasn't totally sure whether Tillman was going to be in or out. If you give Tillman any minutes, they kind of have to come from Luke Kornet. And as a result of that, earlier in the day, I didn't have like a ton of Luke Kornet, but in the initial run of lineups I did in the strategy show this morning, I had Luke Kornet. I think it was in 13% of lineups. because Xavier Tillman is now expected to play, or at the very least going to be active with a chance to play, that did lower my exposure to Luke Cornett down to 5%. So, these are little things that matter kind of on a one-game slate, but Xavier Tillman, is he somebody you're going to be having in any lineups? Is that impacting how you view Luke Cornett? What does the Xavier Tillman news mean to you?
I'm probably not going to do anything with it other than have a little bit of blowout run, but still, I'm going to have Luke Cornett far more. I know that we ran into a spot with Jaden Hardy. Jaden Hardy had been in the rotation the previous 2 games, probably a little bit of an oversight. Didn't end up in the optimal lineup, I don't believe, but that is, just a result of a pretty competitive basketball game where you're getting big minutes for a lot of the starters. And that's the way a lot of those slates will show up. You get a 100-person train. It is what it is. But I think you really got to make some calculated choices if you're going to be playing Xavier Tillman as like your blowout piece. I'm probably going to put a Celtic up in that captain spot and just have it be a Celtics 5-1 onslaught of some capacity. Maybe you run it back with either a cheapie. Doubt I'd be going to Halliburton or Siakam in either of those. I'd probably be making some calculated. I'm only making 40 lineups here today, so I'm not going to be going nuts as is. But I think that would be the approach I would have. Right now, I have 0. If I try to hand build out something here, I did do some pick 6 where I ended up firing up some contrarian takes on, more on the fantasy points for Shepherd, Cornett, Jackson, Hauser, and then shorted Siakam and Halliburton where the Celtics just go completely ballistic. But kind of turned the tide on a game 2 script that we've seen the last 2 series for him. But I would probably say no Xavier Tillman for me today.
Yeah, I don't have any Xavier Tillman lineups. And before we start talking about some of the, captain / MVP plays, just because we are addressing the Xavier Tillman situation, we brought up Luke Cornett. Are there any crazy low-owned players you're taking shots on? Any off-the-wall value options that you think are warranted to be getting to for tonight's game?
Off-the-wall value options. Ben Shepherd's pretty low-owned. I don't know if he's going to end up 8.6% owned. And then Luke Cornett, 3.9% ownership. I don't understand that at all. Him and Isaiah Jackson, I'm going to have a lot of these backup centers. 2,200 for Isaiah Jackson, just a pure, just from a pure fantasy perspective. I know he only played 4 minutes total there, but I could see him walking into more. They brought out Jalen Smith for 1 play. He ends up hacking and 1 and gets ripped off the floor immediately. I thought that was pretty funny, but there's probably more leash for Isaiah Jackson to play more than 4 minutes. He's 2,200. He's probably my favorite of the quote-unquote cheap guys. Ben Shepherd's going to play a lot more, though, and it's down there. I'm very curious to see where his ownership lands because 8.6%, I would want more than that. But if it ends up double digits, 15%, I think that's about efficient.
Yeah, I was watching the game with my sister the other day. We're making fun of Jalen Smith for looking like Bubble Bass from SpongeBob, and he was out of there in a second. He came in for like you said, it was the 1 play, and they pulled him out. Here's what I actually do find interesting about Isaiah Jackson. Of all the cheap guys on the slate, I think that he is the best one to be getting to. He is the most realistic path to upside because when do we see the games that Isaiah Jackson plays actual extended minutes in the playoffs? It's if Miles Turner gets into foul trouble, which wasn't really an issue in last game. It's something that pops up all the time, though, where we see Miles Turner could pick up 2 fouls early in the game. We could have 4 fouls in the third quarter. So Isaiah Jackson only played 4 minutes last game. And honestly, at his price point, Isaiah Jackson is live to score, 8, 9, 10 fantasy points, even in only 5 minutes. But the other thing that could happen, too, if Miles Turner gets into foul trouble, Isaiah Jackson's all of a sudden looking at potentially 10, 12 minutes. That's enough for him to be very, very, very possible to be in an optimal lineup.
I'm 100% in agreement with you. I think there's also the path of blowout run. Again, I talked about it last time. It felt like it went without saying, but Celtics, they're 9-point favorites, 8.5-point favorites. And despite what we saw in the game 1 being competitive there is a chance that they go completely ballistic and just wipe the floor with them. This is not an unheard of scenario for the Boston Celtics in the year of our Lord 2024. They've been the best team in the NBA. They had a 64-18 record during the regular season. They shot 33% from 3. You ramp that up to 45%, well within the range of outcomes for them and who they have on the floor. And they end up 15-20 on the Pacers in the fourth quarter. Isaiah Jackson's probably closing. And that becomes really fun to have Isaiah Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, and once again, it's not like I'm looking at Isaiah Jackson. I saw somebody in chat say Isaiah Jackson might not even play. Yeah, that is possible. He might not even play. But here are all of the guys that I view as like viable as far as cheap punt plays that aren't really picking up that much ownership. You know, Cornette, Hauser, Isaiah Jackson, Ben Shepherd, Xavier Tillman, who we mentioned before. None of these, well, Ben Shepherd's very likely to play, but he's a shitty fantasy producer. Of the guys like Jackson, Hauser, Cornette, Xavier Tillman, Isaiah Jackson, I think, is just as likely to play as those other guys, but he's just a better fantasy producer. So Isaiah Jackson projected for right around 10% ownership. He's somebody who I like being overweight to the field too. Let's answer some of your guys' questions here. First, Teddy Wayman, just a super chat, says, good luck, guys. Teddy, thank you. Appreciate it. And don't worry, Teddy, I've already made sure you got VIP over in playback. You'll be able to watch the game over there. And then Chris Williams gifted us 5 YouTube memberships. Chris, we appreciate your support a whole bunch, as per always, around here. And for anybody else who wants to support the channel, simply like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you want to sign up for any of the packages that we have at Stochastics.com, links below in the description box. Eric, let's talk about some of the captain/MVP options. And last game, Jason Tatum scored the most fantasy points in the entire game. Not just like real, like total raw fantasy points. Jason Tatum scored the most. Was not in the winning lineup. Was not in the winning lineup as the captain. Was not even in the winning lineup as the flex, even though he scored the most fantasy points in the game. What are you going to be doing with Jason Tatum tonight?
I'm going to be playing him. I don't want to go crazy overthinking it. I project him for the most minutes of anybody. I have him projected for the most fantasy points. I know he's 11-6. I know that he wasn't optimal, didn't end up in the winning lineup. 29.6% captain ownership is probably something that I'm going to get away from a little bit. I've got some pieces, once again, running back to Miles Turner in the captain spot quite a bit, considering the ownership isn't necessarily there for him. 8K for utility, somebody that I'm getting to quite a bit as well. But utility, I'm more than happy to be firing up Jason Tatum. I'm also very, very heavy on Celtics 4-2-5-1 builds, where I do think that the underrepresented script relative to what it should be in these lineups is going to be just the Celtics pummel them. This last game was competitive. I know that's not something you think about a ton. We think about that more in like NFL Showdown, where it's like, oh, play the script you're thinking about. But as I run the Sims tool, I'm basically filtering out some lineups to just have that 5-1 type script, and no way that Jason Tatum wouldn't be somebody that I want to have in a large majority of those lineups.
Yeah, so I have Jason Tatum in 60% of my lineups, which means, hey, I've got, Tatum's in more than half of my lineups, but the field has Jason Tatum in nearly 80% of lineups. So kind of the same situation for me as what I had last game. Not an outright fade of Jason Tatum, but I've got a good amount less of him than the field. And it's really just because I find it hard to build a lot of unique lineups with Jason Tatum. He's harder to avoid over on FanDuel, though. So if you are going to be playing Jason Tatum in the MVP spot on FanDuel, I recommend one of two things. Number one, leave salary on the table. Or number two, get Contrarian in the start and pro spots. Because if you're just like Jason Tatum in the MVP spot, and then you got Jaylen Brown in the star spot, and then you're going with, like Miles Turner, TJ McConnell, Obi Toppin. Do you have a lineup that projects well? Yes, but you also have a lineup that if you win, you're tying with like 10% of the field or something like that. So that's one of the reasons why I'm underweight to the field on Tatum. Not because I have an issue with him, just same as the other day. It's kind of hard to build unique lineups with him when he is as popular as he is, and also with his price point. There's only so many combinations of different players you could pair Jason Tatum with. So getting to him in lineups, a little bit more than half of mine, but still underweight to the field. So now with that said, Eric, if you aren't playing Jason Tatum in the captain spot over on DraftKings, who is your favorite non-Tatum captain to go to?
Favorite non-Tatum captain, like pull up my lineups here. Mm-hmm. It was different earlier in the day. It was Jaylen Brown before, kind of the same thing that happened to me last time. Pulling this back up, I have the second most of Derek White. So Derek White was, it's kind of the same conundrum we ran into last time. Drew Holiday had the game. Drew Holiday's pulling 5.6% captain ownership. I'm happy to be going to more Derek White and have it be Derek White game in this spot here as well. There's this public recency bias, and we see it all the time in these showdown slates, especially as we get further down the line where these are the only things people focus on. And it's like everybody just saw Drew Holiday play extremely well. Had the best matchup on the floor, was extremely efficient, had a full box score in addition to scoring. But Derek White, somebody that I think at 5% is a little bit underrepresented here in the captain. I think Drew Holiday playing a little bit more. It's like 0.5%. It's pretty negligible, but we're going to see, coming off of a really nice game one, I think a little bit more ownership on Drew, a little bit less on Derek White. Derek White routinely been the better fantasy producer between the two of them here this season. Only an $800 discrepancy between the two in the utility. I have a lot more Derek White than I have of Drew Holiday today.
Let's see for myself. I'm overweight to Derek White and Drew Holiday in the captain spot, but really the biggest player that I have a stand on as far as a captain goes today is Tyrese Halliburton, projected for sub 10% ownership. And it does look like if the field is going to be paying up for a captain, they're either going to Jason Tatum, who's showing up in about 35% of the field's lineups in the contest generator, Jaylen Brown, nearly 20% captain ownership. However, you got just the single-digit ownership projected in the contest generator on Tyrese Halliburton in that multiplier spot. I think that's a good way to get yourself on a build that's a little bit different in the field, because if the field, like I said, is paying up at the captain, typically going to Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. So if you go to Tyrese Halliburton instead, he's very live to score more points than Tatum or Brown. That's also why, if you're looking at the MVP spot over on FanDuel, I also think Tyrese Halliburton's the most reasonable way to deviate off of Jason Tatum, because you get these ceiling games out of Tyrese Halliburton where he gets more aggressive shooting the ball, he could have more usage, and then once he starts to see shots fall, here's what we've seen with Tyrese Halliburton in the playoffs. If he gets off to a slow start, he becomes really timid, and we don't see him take a whole lot of shots, and we've seen him even say that in interviews where, like after a game one loss against the Knicks or something like that, he'll say, hey, you know what? I wasn't aggressive enough. I only took 4 or 5 shots in the second half of that game, and he makes a point to be more aggressive in the next game. So a lot of the usage comes and goes with Tyrese Halliburton. And considering that we have seen him be a little bit of a front runner, and when he plays well, we start to see the shot volume take up more usage for him when he does see the ball go through the basket. Coming off a game where he made 6 threes, it does seem kind of dumb, but it does appear to be the case with Halliburton that when he has a good game or a couple of good games in a row, he's more apt to shoot. And then when he has a couple of bad games in a row, he has to kind of be convinced to shoot a little bit more. So I think there's upside in Tyrese Halliburton at his ownership. I like him as a
Greg pulling the I know ball takes. Look at that. I know ball. Greg just letting it be known.
So here's the issue.
I know.
It's also the same reason I bet that other day, like Halliburton to like 7-1 to score 20 points or whatever.
It was a phenomenal bet.
They're 25 points. It's the same sort of deal where on these one game slates, you kind of have to find reasons to play different angles.
I would agree. And that's what I'm doing. I'm right there with you. Again, I just put my my manhood at stake. I posted the pick six card for everybody where, you know, the one part about pick six and about like contrarian stuff when we're talking DFS, it's like when you get the contrarian stance right, you get paid out a lot more than when you get the neutral stance right. Like it's really fun to have a 100-person train and end up having the $6 take it down. But like, you know, we saw a 5-1 win for Minnesota with Luka Garza for the boss man. We saw a 5-1 with Minnesota the other night where it was Aaron Gordon as the singular piece that you needed from the Nuggets side. And then it was just the 5 starters from Minnesota, and nobody really had that build. I think it was like a 3 or 4-way split up top. I like getting to the just Celtics slaughter in this spot. And so I'm playing some Peyton Pritchard in the captain. That's the other one that I'm getting a little bit different with. And then TJ McConnell as the sole run back with all of the main pieces. Not that, you know, I'm just telling you what I'm doing in single entry. I think that there are just so many ways to build out that script and get paid out when you're right the one time out of 5 or 10 where you're avoiding so much duplication. So I think about Showdown in NBA a little bit differently because of how projectable it can be. But I think this is a really good opportunity when you're talking about 9-point. Like how many times in Eastern and Western Conference Finals do we ever have 9-point spreads? I'm going to say not very often, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, it's not all that often somebody's a minus 2,500 favorite to win the series after one game. So that's where
it has to go to overtime to win it in game one.
Today, we got a handful of super chats that came in. So let's read off these ones right here. First, our guy Sean Jeezy says, good luck tonight, guys. Who's your favorite sub 5K captain on DK? If you're looking to get cheap at captain on DraftKings, Eric, which direction do you want to be going?
I will pull this up for you because I'm pretty flat amongst. So sub 5K, it's Peyton Pritchard. Just talked about him. This is the blowout script where if you're trying to build it out 5-1, I like getting to him. Don't mind that Obi Toppin, but the Obi Toppin one, mean, he played phenomenal in the 22 minutes last time out. I mean, I feel like Obi Toppin chalk days never go well for me. He was, 30-ish, 40-ish% owned, and I had 10%, and it was a disaster. But I think it's going to be Peyton Pritchard. Probably don't want to go to Cornette. Probably don't want to go to Shepard, Hauser, Jackson. Probably giving up a little bit too much. I also think when you go to Jackson, you can't really use up the salary. Everybody's going to be running into the exact same combination of players. It's really hard to get that one different. I'd almost be more inclined to go to the 2K and try to zero it out in some capacity. Or I guess it'd be 3K when they're the captain. But Peyton Pritchard for me, the guy that I have the most of sub 5K.
Yeah, let me build out a lineup here. So here's the caveat. I'm not really playing anybody. I have one Peyton Pritchard lineup. So I guess Pritchard would be my answer, but just to deviate from you, I will say Isaiah Jackson, just because if Miles Turner gets into foul trouble and Isaiah Jackson scores 25 fantasy points, it's not a likely outcome, but it's a realistic one that you could see a game script for. So I'll say Isaiah Jackson, but I really don't think it's necessary to be punting at captain today, Sean. But if I have to go with one, I'm going to say Isaiah Jackson. Jacob Dunn said, is McConnell a captain just throwing away money?
No.
So he's not quite 5K. He is a little bit more expensive than that. He is $5,600 in the utility spot here. If Sean would have given us the parameters of 6K or lower, I would have said TJ McConnell.
Has TJ McConnell played well enough to not be closing out blowouts, though?
I don't know. I mean,
I have no
put him in
clue
there
anymore.
They put him in there in blowouts.
I know they do. And now I'm just confused. I never know what to think anymore because I'm like, there's a part of me that just expects them to not do it at times. And then they do it. It's like TJ McConnell's there. So maybe I should get to a TJ McConnell with 5 Celtics build. That'd be fun to clip that for social if that actually comes to fruition. I'm going to actually build that out right now and see what it looks like.
I've got, it's not a lot. I've got 3.5% of TJ McConnell in that multiplier spot. I don't think it's throwing away money. If you're telling me you're playing 20 lineups and 10 of them have McConnell, I'd say, yeah, it's a little bit problematic. But if you have McConnell in 1 or 2 lineups at captain, I don't have an issue with that.
Ghetto don't
Farmer
hate this.
Boy says, I hate the Rockies. Good luck tonight. So a little bit of support there from a Ghetto Farmer Boy who looks like he's had the same sort of sweats as you, Eric. Really quick here with 7 minutes left to go. Who's the nuke of the night? Who's the nuke of the night today, Eric?
Oh, we're just going to go right into that, are we? For me, this is just... He played enough to justify just getting to tons of him. And I feel like he's the one guy that when I pulled up ownership this morning, I was shocked to see him as low owned as what he is. I'm trying to get to the data hub here. Probably need to upload this final thing of lineups here to see what the final number is on him. But I love Peyton Pritchard today. I'm building towards some of these blowout scripts. 25.7% ownership, 1.4% captain ownership. Have him in 2 of the 20 that I'm playing in the $4. I'll see what I end up throwing into this other 20 max here as well. But Peyton Pritchard's in over half my lineups. I really think that considering we just saw him play over 20 minutes in this last time out, didn't completely smash, didn't end up optimal, 23 minutes there, didn't end up in the overtime lineup, buoyed everybody else's box score to put prices like Drew Holiday up a little bit and things of that sort. I love getting to Peyton Pritchard. He's been very efficient for them off the bench here in the last couple series. Now, against the Pacers, this is like a prime spot to be utilizing him. Him and TJ McConnell just match up. It's the Spider-Man meme. And I don't think TJ McConnell is going to be underrepresented considering once you had Nesmith foul out, you saw TJ McConnell in overtime. He's been like the guy that they want out on the floor, and he's sharing it more and more and more with Tyrese Halliburton. But Peyton Pritchard, guys, I absolutely love him in these contrarian builds that I've got. 4-2, 5-1 Celtics. Give me Peyton Pritchard, nuke of the night.
I was like oddly confident you were going to say the guy that I'm about to say. You brought him up briefly earlier. I was like, oh boy, Eric and I are going to be on the same nuke play today. But you didn't bring him up. Derek White. For the longest time throughout the course of the season, Derek White was the DFS player who was more popular than Drew Holiday. That was also the case earlier in the playoffs. Now what happens? We see one game where Drew Holiday has a ceiling and people, not saying people like write off Derek White or anything like that, but he's quite a bit less popular than Drew Holiday for this one game slate. I love getting to Derek White. I'm my biggest stand in terms of just ownership relative to the field. I have Derek White in more than half of my lineups. For somebody who's only projected for ownership in like the mid 30% range, who's a fantasy producer of his caliber and a good matchup against the Indiana Pacers, I think he's a really good pivot off of Drew Holiday. I am overweight to both of them, but I'm heavier overweight to Derek White. He's individually the player I'm most overweight to on the entire slate. And I do think that some of the ownership, which also you mentioned earlier in the show, Eric, with some of the recency bias, I do think there's going to be a lot of people that look at the last game and be like, oh my God, I have to play Drew Holiday.
Yep.
And if people are playing Drew Holiday, a lot of them aren't going to want to include Derek White and Drew Holiday in the same lineup. I like going to Derek White.
Yeah, we're like going back to bare bones DFS when people zigzag. Like that's really as simple as it gets. Like recency bias becomes a thing. It becomes more pronounced with more public money, with more public tournaments, with only a few NBA games, with, more MLB slates to occupy people throughout the day and not pay attention to their lineups. We should take advantage of that on these shows. If you're watching these shows, you have a great opportunity to just kind of leverage your lineups and put yourself in a spot that when everybody floods towards Drew Holiday, we're going to be on Derek White. I have 60% Derek White. I'm completely there with you.
Anybody else that's an important piece of your lineups? We only have a few minutes left to go here, but anybody you have a heavy amount of exposure to that we have not talked about yet over the course of this 30-minute show?
Yeah, Peyton Pritchard's my contrarian one. TJ McConnell, I think, is a great piece. Again, I don't know if he continues to close in blowouts or not. All I know is that he's a really good fantasy producer. 1.20 fantasy points per minute. Coming into this series, he was leading the entire Indiana Pacers team in fantasy points per minute. Like, that's wild. 1.2, a little bit higher there than Mr. Siakam, than Mr. Halliburton entering this series. That's a pretty wild fact. So if you run into more minutes for him, yeah, it's going to go down. The production's dropped, 0.08? You play better basketball teams in the playoffs. Doesn't surprise me. You have to share the floor more with Tyrese Halliburton. Doesn't surprise me. So give me all of that you got.
Yeah, I've pretty much talked about all the players that I'm most overweight to over the course of the show at different points. Derek White being one of them, just talked about him. Isaiah Jackson being one. We brought up him at the top of the show as my favorite punt option. And then also Tyrese Halliburton, who I said I like getting to deviate off of some of the other high-end guys. But now on the flip side, Eric, let's give ourselves an opportunity to look stupid. Who is going to potentially ruin you today? Who are you underweight to the field to that everybody's obviously live on a one-game slate, but who are you underweight to the field to that you're most nervous about ruining you today?
Obi Toppin. Same. This dude just owns my soul. I don't know what to do anymore. I know he's a good fantasy producer. He's just so damn popular. I have 15% of Obi Toppin. I know exactly how this goes. Obi Toppin smashes, and Indy keeps it close, and it is what it is. But I can't live life in fear all the time, Greg. I can't live life in fear. Also, Al Horford. I know he played a bunch there. I'm a little bit, at 30%, I could see him being pretty darn popular here on this slate, but I guess we will find out here. I'm feeling pretty good about my lineups, though, as I look at them. The Isaiah Jackson piece, obviously being overweight to him, there's lots of ways that goes wrong, too, but I'm right there with you. I think he's a good piece to get to, especially if I'm trying to play towards the Celtics blowout.
Yeah, I got lucky last slate. So game one, I actually did have the nuts. I was part of the group of people that won the Showdown GPP for the first slate. I had 9% of Obi Toppin. It just happened to be one of those Obi Toppin lineups I had was the nut lineup. For today, I'm once again underweight to the field to me. He's projected for north of 50% ownership. I have him in 12% of lineups. And even Obi Toppin last game, he didn't play a ton of minutes. There was overtime. Nesmith fouled out, and he was the guy who checked in for Nesmith when he was in foul trouble, and then also in the overtime as well after Nesmith fouled out. So it's hard for me to expect Toppin to reliably play north of 20 minutes. And then considering what his price point is now and how popular he is, it's really more so than anything the popularity that gets to me, because you could see a scenario where he has, a good fantasy game relative to his price. I just think the ownership is too high. He is projected to be the most popular player in the flex spot of any single player on the slate today. So like anybody but Toppin, and I'll be pretty happy as being the highest scoring bench player for today. About 30 seconds left to go here until lock. If you guys haven't done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Any final food for thought before we sign off here and head on over to Playback, Eric?
I'm ready to rock, baby.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Over in Playback, about to sweat out the game. Ben Raza is going to jump on. We'll watch the first half of the game. Maybe some live betting opportunities. We have found some with Ben on the shows before, and they've been really dumb, fun sweats, like Duncan Robinson over 3.5 points in a Heat game, where Ben and I got to just root for Duncan Robinson to not do shit. Okay. And well, we weren't rooting for him to not do shit. We were rooting for him to do something, and he opted to not do shit. But come check us out over in Playback. Watch the game alongside with us. Guys, have a great night. See you back here tomorrow. If you aren't going to watch on playback, if you are watching in playback, see you in about 10 seconds.